Close your eyes for a second and imagine this. It's 2009. You've just survived the worst financial crash since the Great Depression. Banks have collapsed, millions of jobs have vanished, and homes were foreclosed almost overnight. The panic is still fresh, the wounds still open, and the future feels painfully uncertain.
But now, imagine something far more unsettling. What if this moment wasn't the bottom? What if the emergency bailouts failed, the stock market never recovered, and unemployment stayed in double digits, not for months, but for years, even decades? A world where recovery never arrives.
No booming tech stocks, no record-breaking bull market, no headlines celebrating the longest economic expansion in history. Just a society permanently stuck in survival mode, where optimism fades and crisis becomes normal.
Today, we're going to explore an uncomfortable counterfactual question, not as science fiction, but as a serious historical and economic thought experiment. What if the 2008 financial crisis never ended? And what would that world actually look like?
Let's rewind. In 2008, the global financial system came closer to total collapse than most people realize. Major investment banks failed, credit markets froze, and trust, the most important asset in finance, simply evaporated. At the center of the storm was a dangerous combination: cheap credit, excessive leverage, and financial instruments so complex that even professionals barely understood them. Risk was everywhere, but hidden behind elegant math and optimistic assumptions. Mortgages were bundled, sliced, rated as safe, and sold across the world. As long as U.S. housing prices kept rising, the illusion held. But the moment prices stalled, the entire structure cracked, and panic followed.
In our real timeline, governments stepped in. Central banks injected trillions of dollars. Interest rates were slashed to near zero, and banks were rescued. The system stabilized, not healed, but stabilized.
But now imagine an alternate timeline. Political gridlock blocks bailouts, central banks hesitate, public outrage demands that markets pay the price. The system is left alone to correct itself. First, the banking system collapses completely. Without emergency liquidity, banks don't just lose money, they become insolvent. Depositors panic, withdrawals accelerate, and credit disappears almost entirely. And when credit disappears, the economy doesn't slow down, it stops. Small businesses can't make payroll, corporations can't refinance debt, and consumers can't borrow for homes, cars, or education. Money still exists, but it no longer moves. Unemployment doesn't peak at 10%, it keeps climbing. Factories shut down permanently, office buildings empty out, entire industries shrink beyond recovery, not because people refuse to work, but because the system connecting labor to capital has broken. This is a depressionary spiral. Falling demand leads to layoffs. Layoffs reduce spending. Reduced spending causes even more layoffs. And without aggressive intervention, the cycle feeds on itself for years. Housing doesn't just fall 30 or 40%. Prices keep falling. Foreclosures flood the market. Neighborhoods hollow out, and cities lose tax revenue. The damage spreads far beyond Wall Street. And here's what most people underestimate. This doesn't just hurt the poor. It destroys the middle class. Retirement accounts never recover. Pensions fail, and savings evaporate. Life plans are delayed or abandoned entirely.
This crisis doesn't stay in the United States. American banks are deeply connected to Europe, Asia, and emerging markets. As U.S. finance collapses permanently, global trade fractures and trust between nations erodes.
Extended economic pain doesn't just change markets, it changes people. Trust in institutions collapses. Populism dominates. Extremism gains legitimacy. History shows us again and again, when economic systems fail long enough, political systems follow.
In our real world, the post-2008 era fueled smartphones, social media, cloud computing, and AI. In a never-ending crisis, investment dries up. Innovation slows. Only the largest, most entrenched companies survive.
A generation grows up without ever experiencing prosperity. They don't expect stability. They don't trust institutions. For them, the system never worked, and that belief shapes the future. The crisis didn't end because markets healed themselves. It ended because governments chose stability over purity. Not solved, stopped. And the real danger for future crises isn't intervention, it's paralysis. Now comes the most dangerous consequence of all: debt deflation. As prices fall and incomes collapse, debt doesn't shrink, it grows heavier. Mortgages stay the same. Student loans don't disappear. Every dollar owed becomes harder to repay. Defaults skyrocket. Families fall behind. Businesses miss payments. What remains of the banking system tightens even further, cutting credit to protect itself, and in doing so, deepens the collapse.
This isn't a recession anymore. It's a permanent condition, a crisis that doesn't last months or years, but decades. Economic memory is replaced by economic trauma.
History has seen something like this before. Once, during the Great Depression. But this time, the system is far more interconnected, far more leveraged, and far more fragile than it was in the 1930s. Modern finance isn't local, it's global. Banks, currencies, and supply chains are tightly linked. When one pillar collapses permanently, the shockwaves don't fade. They multiply.
Trade slows, supply chains fracture, countries turn inward, protectionism returns, tariffs rise, borders tighten, and globalization, once seen as inevitable, begins to reverse.
The world feels smaller, opportunities narrow. Movement of goods, money, and people becomes restricted. Growth is no longer expected. It's remembered. Extended economic pain doesn't just reshape economies, it reshapes politics. Anger replaces patience. Certainty replaces nuance. People don't want explanations anymore. They want answers. Populism doesn't rise, it dominates. Extremist movements gain legitimacy. Authoritarian leaders promise stability in exchange for freedom, and many are willing to accept that trade. Democracy itself begins to feel inefficient, too slow, too divided. In a world stuck in crisis, compromise feels like weakness, and strong hands feel comforting. Technology still exists, but without optimism. Startups can't raise capital. Venture funding disappears. Risk-taking dies. Innovation becomes incremental, cautious, and unequal. Only the largest, most entrenched corporations survive. Competition fades.
economic mobility freezes. The ladder still exists, but most people can no longer climb it.
Young people enter adulthood in a world without recovery. They don't expect stability. They don't trust institutions. For them, crisis isn't an event, it's normal life.
People delay marriage, delay children, delay dreams. Society becomes risk-averse, cautious, and deeply defensive. Survival replaces ambition.
So here's the brutal question. Could the world have recovered without intervention? In theory, yes, eventually. But eventually might have meant 20 or 30 years of economic pain.
An entire generation sacrificed to economic purism, to the belief that markets must always correct themselves, no matter the human cost.
Here's the paradox. The very actions criticized in 2008, bailouts, money printing, zero interest rates, are exactly what prevented this world. Not a perfect recovery, an imperfect survival. The crisis didn't end because the problems were fixed. It ended because the collapse was stopped. And that distinction matters, because the vulnerabilities never disappeared. And that should change how we think about future crises, because the real danger isn't intervention. The real danger is paralysis. If this alternate history made you uncomfortable, that's the point. Like, subscribe, and tell us, was the crisis solved or just postponed?